Hello students, through this video we cover depreciation in Excel. You must have studied depreciation in accounting before and you must be aware of the two commonly used methods that are there to calculate depreciation on a fixed asset over its useful life. The two methods being uh, straight line method and the written down value method. Written down value method is also called diminishing balance method. Those two we are going to study in Excel also. To mention major difference between SLM and DBM, in SLM depreciation is charged evenly across each accounting period, meaning same amount is depreciated each year from value of asset. And in DBM there's a fixed rate of depreciation which is applied to the opening balance of asset every year. And in that method, generally depreciation charged in initial years you would see is higher as compared to the subsequent years. So the also that reflects the name diminishing balance method, where annual charge of depreciation keeps decreasing every year. Now, for calculating depreciation as per straight line method in Excel, we use the function SLN. And for calculating depreciation as per diminishing balance method, we make use of the DB function. We have the syntax here for both, right? We'll quickly go through the syntax and the arguments that are contained within the syntax, and then we'll start with the question. So, syntax for SLN function is SLN. Always remember, whenever you are starting your formula function, you start with an is equal to sign. So, is equal to SLN, parenthesis open. You have the arguments cost, salvage, and life. Now, again, you would remember cost is the initial cost of the asset. Salvage is the value at the end of the useful life, or also you would refer it to as scrap value in accounting. So it's same as that. It's actually another word for scrap value. And then life is the number of periods over which asset is being depreciated, right? Similarly, if you go to the diminishing balance method, you have DB function in Excel, the syntax of which is given here is equal to DB parenthesis open cost, salvage, life, period, and then month, parenthesis close. Now this function you would notice has two extra arguments. These three are just exactly the same as we discussed in the SLN function. Here we have period and month. One thing that you will notice is that month is there in the square brackets, which means that it is not a mandatory argument. You can, if you wish, you can put some value here. If you don't wish, you can leave it. And when you just leave it, when you just omit putting any entry here for this argument, then the DB function would take up the default value. I'll just come to this also. So DB function syntax is this. Cost is the initial cost again. Salvage is the value at the end of the useful life. Life is the total number of periods over which the asset is supposed to be depreciated, the useful life. Period, when we say period, we are trying to say the particular period for which we are going to be calculating the depreciation. And month, like I told you, it's in square brackets, so it's an optional argument. Uh, for sake of simplicity, we'll just leave it here. And in the next question, I'll explain to you what is this month. And when we omit, uh, making any entry for the month, it takes the default value, which is 12. All right, we move on to the simpler question. We have this question here where cost is given to us as 1 lakh, salvage value is 10,000, and years of useful life is 5. So now how do we proceed? We make these three columns, one for period, another for SLN, and the next one for DB method. So we have these two methods of depreciation here. For period, we hardcode these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the upcoming examples and questions that you see, you would see that not necessarily do we hardcode all these numbers. We put instead some formulas or functions. But obviously this is the first question, so we are not putting anything here. We have just hard-coded these simply. We look at this is the simplest question. So for SLN, what we do, we start putting our formula. How do we do that? We write is equal to SLN. The moment we write is equal to SLN and open a parenthesis, a bracket, it already, Excel already give us the arguments that it needs there. So it asks what is the cost. So I can just go on to this cell, cost cell, and all I need to do is, while I'm placing my cost cell, referencing my cost cell here, I need to press the F4 key if you are a Windows user, or if you are using Mac, then Command plus T to do absolute referencing here. These dollar signs you see, this is for absolute referencing. This will make sure that when this formula is dragged down or copied down, this cell reference does not change. So making it absolute in that sense. So absolute referencing is done. So we select the cost cell, then we go on to selecting the salvage cell, and the last one being life. All these cells have been given the absolute referencing, and all you need to do is press enter. Once you press enter, you get the amount 18,000. Once you get that, all you need to do is just drag it down, copy the formula, and you will get these values. Then we go on to the DB part. How do you do DB? Again, simple. You just write is equal to DB, parenthesis open. It already asks you what arguments are required. So you put the cost from here. Again, do absolute referencing. Salvage value is given. Life is the total number of years for which the asset will be depreciated. This is life, so 5. Now period, I told you, is the particular period that we are talking about for which the depreciation is going to be charged for. So here the period is this cell. You can see here as well that we have referenced period cell here, which is C29 cell number. Here you would notice that we have not made use of any referencing. I have not used absolute referencing or mixed referencing. Why? Because I want that when we copy down this formula, when we drag down this formula, then it should not stick to this cell, but rather go on to the next subsequent rows and pick up values from there. So that is DB function. You press enter and all you need to do is just drag. So when you drag and copy, these are the values that you get. Now, how can you be assured that what you've done is correct? First thing, obviously, first indicator to look into in this kind of question is that the SLN values would be equal. Why? Because you know under straight line method, a fixed amount of depreciation is charged each year. So all the amounts are equal, and also when you would see the cumulative depreciation that is charged under SLN, you would see here at the bottom the sum is coming at 90,000. So the cost was 1 lakh. When 90,000 is charged as when 90,000 is charged as depreciation, obviously it will leave us with a salvage value of 10,000, the closing balance of 10,000. So obviously we have calculated it correctly. Now if you look at the DB method, and if you try to look at the cumulative depreciation that is charged under DB, it is not exactly 90,000. It is 3 rupees less than 90,000. You can see 89,997. So obviously, when it is not exactly 90,000, the salvage value would also not be exactly 10,000. It would be some rupees more or less. Now in DB, you would often notice this, that the cumulative depreciation does not come out to be exactly what it should come out. Like in this case, it should come out to be 90,000 according to the question, and thus the salvage value is also not exactly what it should be under DB method. But it's fine, because in Excel, when we are using the DB function, we don't get the exact numbers. We do get accurate numbers, but yes, they are not exact, and that is because how the Excel does its computation of DB. So it takes numbers to about 3 decimal places, and then the rounding off happens, and so it is very okay to find this kind of difference. But this definitely assures me that we have done the question right. So now we move on to the next question. Here, what is going to be introduced is an argument that we saw in DB function, which was months in first year, which we did not uh, do in the first question, but obviously we'll do it here. So first, let's explain that what is months in first year. So there's a possibility that not always the asset is purchased at the beginning of the year, rather somewhere mid of the year. So for example, my financial year is from 1st April to 31st March, and the machinery is purchased in January. So obviously till the end of the financial year, you know that machinery will be charged only for 3 months, Jan, Feb and March. So that is months in first year. That for how many months in the first year is the asset going to be depreciated. All right. So whenever now we have this possibility that months in first year is less than 12 months, that is it is not full year, that is the asset is not purchased in the beginning of the year but somewhere in the mid, then what do we do? Whenever we are making our schedules, the depreciation schedule or the fixed asset account, the period, the life gets extended to life of asset plus 1 year. So life of asset is n years, and we will make schedule for n plus 1 years, 5 plus 1 years, which is 6. And when do we do that? When the months in first year is less than 12 months. If asset is purchased at beginning of year 1, then no depreciation will be charged after the useful life of the asset, which is the n years, no matter whatever the method of depreciation. Okay, so please keep in mind whenever months in first year is given, we make the schedule for n plus 1 years. So now if you remember, I told you that months in first year is an argument in the DB function, but it's not an argument in the SLN function. You can quickly see here also, it is one of the argument in the DB function but not in the SLN function. So what do we do? Because SLN does not take number of months in first year as an argument, we have to multiply the SLN by number of months in first year divide by 12 to basically compute proportionate amount charged in the first year. In the remaining years, which is from year 2 to year 5, which is the useful life, because those are complete years, second year to fifth year, we simply use SLN function as it will calculate the SLN, the depreciation for full year. And then when we go on to the sixth year, again we have to make some provision for calculating depreciation for remaining months of first year. So what do? We do we multiply SLN by 12 minus months in first year divide by 12. That is how we calculate SLN, depreciation under SLN, when months in first year is given to us. Alright, we'll obviously see it in the question also. However, let's just quickly see what do we do, how do we deal with months in first year in DB function. We don't really have to make any provisions like we did in SLN, because we made those provisions in SLN because the syntax did not have an argument for that. But in DB, you remember there is an argument months in first year. So we just simply calculate DB with the simple DB function, and we calculate that across the years. Okay, so if we look at the question here, we have this question that cost of asset is 2 lakhs, life of asset given to us is 5 years, salvage value is 20,000, and then months in first year is given. That meaning that the asset was not purchased in the beginning of the year, but somewhere in the mid of the year. So 10 months of depreciation will be charged in the first year. That is what is given. Now if you would notice, for this 10 here I have created a drop down, and because months, in a year we have 12 months, we have given the values 1 to 12. You should know how do we create the drop downs. You go on to the data group and you will find data validation option there. And so I'll just show you, though I have Mac, so, and the data validation option I'm getting from somewhere else, but obviously it's there under the data group only, you can also find. So how do we create these drop downs? First you go to the data validation option, which I think you will have to navigate. Then here under allow you choose list, and for source I have typed these values. You can type these values also, else you can create a list somewhere here and just reference it here. Okay, so that's how we do it. And once you press OK, you will get months in first year with a drop down. So you can change these months in first year, and as you change you will notice that the figures here in my solution also change, right? So I have just added a drop down here. Now, so we have the cost, we have the life of asset, the salvage, and the months in first year. I told you whenever we have months in first year in the question, we'll stretch our question to n plus 1 year. N is the life of asset, so we do a plus 1 for the period. Okay, till now these numbers are again hard coded, but as we move on, we'll put some formulas here, some functions here. Okay, opening balance is direct cell reference from here, cost of asset, right? Then we calculate depreciation according to the SLN here. How do we do that? I told you for the first period you need to do is equal to SLN, and then I just open this, I have these brackets here, meaning simple SLN is calculated. So is equal to SLN, whatever arguments it asks for, cost, salvage, and life. I told you in the previous question also that we do absolute referencing for these particular arguments, into months in first year. Months in first year is given here, so that cell reference is used here, by 12. Here if you will see, I've created this list here of months just for reference purpose. This is obviously not part of the solution, and we don't make it like this, but just for reference purpose. So like we saw in SLN first period, the months for which depreciation is charged is 10. From second period onwards to fifth period, depreciation will be charged for all the months, all 12 months. So full year depreciation is charged. And in the last period, which is n plus 1, which is sixth in our case, because n was 5 and n plus 1 becomes 6. So we have this sixth period also here. In the last period, depreciation will be charged for how many months? The months that remain after providing depreciation for this one. So in a year there are 12 months, you know that. If out of 12 here, 10 months, for 10 months depreciation has been provided. So for here in the last n plus 1 period, for 2 months depreciation will be provided. Okay, then it makes a complete 5 year. So for the last one we'll have 12 minus the months in first year. Okay, so now coming back, I just explained to you this one for period 2 to 5th, like I told you, because depreciation is charged for full year for all 12 months. So we'll have simple SLN function in place. So is equal to SLN and whatever the arguments are there, cost, salvage, and life, you know that now, right? And once we put this formula here in the second cell, second period, we can copy it to the third and fourth and fifth. But obviously for sixth, we'll have to again write the formula, write the function. Now, what is the function for SLN in n plus 1 period? It is SLN into 12 minus months in first year. Like for in our example, it will be 12 minus 10, which will come out to be 2. So 2 months we have to uh, depreciate the asset more. So 12 minus months in first year by 12, right? So here, let's see what we have done. SLN, the arguments, cost, salvage, life go in there. Then into 12 minus, we have made use of this cell reference by 12. Okay, you would notice that we are not hard coding this. I have not done 12 minus 10 in my head and then written 2 here. I have not done that, and you will not do that either. We have to make use of cell referencing as much as possible, because ultimately when we do our comprehensive question, our aim will be that our sheet is generalized meaning that if we change our inputs from here, the whole output, the whole sheet changes accordingly, right? So that cannot be done if we uh, keep on doing keep on you know hard coding numbers. We have to make use of cell referencing. Anyway, so SLN uh, for the last n plus 1 period is SLN into 12 minus months in first year by 12, and that's all. For closing balance, how do we calculate the closing balance? We just deduct the depreciation from the opening balance. So you would see what we have done is opening minus depreciation, and then we have just copied this formula across and we've got the closing balances. Okay, so you can see it here, and you can see that the salvage value that was to remain after the useful life of the asset was 20,000, and that is what it remains. So 20,000 closing balance remains in your SLN. Also, if you would notice, depreciation across all years where it depreciation is charged for full year, for all 12 months, the amounts are exactly the same: 36,000, 36,000, 36,000, 36,000. And for the years where depreciation has been charged in proportions because of months in first year, if you add depreciation of first year and the last year, which is n plus 1 year, that also 30 plus 6,000, 36,000 comes out to be total. So you know, because it's straight line method, the depreciation charges are equal, and obviously you know why it's not equal in the first and the last period. Also about the opening balance, I think I did not tell you about the opening balance. For the first opening balance, we just do cell referencing from the cost of asset, right? And for next opening balance, the previous closing becomes the new opening. So just see here, the previous closing has become the new opening, and then we copy it. So here you can see again, previous closing is the new opening. Again, previous closing is the new opening, right? So that's what happens. For opening balance, previous closing becomes the new opening. You know about the depreciation. Here it is. Closing balances are your opening minus depreciation. Correct? Now we go on to the written down value method, or the diminishing balance method, and we'll calculate depreciation through DB. Years or the period again are hard coded, and they've been extended to n plus 1 because we have months in first year. If we did not have months in first year, and if it was mentioned in the question that the asset is purchased on the first day of the year or in the beginning of the period, then obviously we would not have this complication of months in first year. But because the question demands, so we'll extend the period to n plus 1. These are all hard coded. And like I said earlier, as we move to the next questions, we'll try not to hard code them but put some formulas in here. Opening balance is the cell reference from here, cost of asset. Depreciation, like I told you, that first of all, DB function will calculate depreciation for each year on basis whether depreciation is to be calculated for full year or less than full year, depending upon months in first year, automatically. Because in the arguments itself, it has months in first year. So all we need to do is we type the DB formula and we can copy it across. We need not make any adjustments in the formula like we did for SLN. So let's see, depreciation here is equal to DB. Cost is cell reference from here. We have done absolute referencing to it because we don't want, like I told you earlier also, we don't want that when I copy the formula, I don't want this cell to move. Then salvage is again given. I just use the cell referencing. I just go on to the cell and select that. Life again given here. Again absolute cell referencing. Period is this, right? And you know why I've not done any absolute referencing here, because I want that as the formula gets copied down, I also want the period it to take the consecutive periods, the subsequent periods, okay? And then the month. You remember we had not input any value in the previous question for month, but here we are going to, because we have been given in the question. So month, you should know in DB function, this month is months in first year. And we make use of the cell reference again, and we do absolute cell referencing, and that's about it. So it calculates depreciation for us, and we just copy paste it, and it automatically takes all the months and everything into consideration. For closing balance, you know it is opening minus depreciation, copy pasted across. For next opening, you know it is the previous closing, copy pasted across, right? So majorly that's that. And when you would see the closing balance in DB method, it is not exactly equal to the salvage. What it should be 20,000, but it's coming out to be 20,606. But I told you that uh, we need not worry about this, because this is how DB function calculates in Excel, right? So because it does a lot of rounding off, it takes up to 3 decimal places, numbers up to 3 decimal places. So we are fine. It is not exact number, but it is close by. So this is where we finish with our second question. Moving on to the next question, you will see that we make generalized schedule here. What does generalized mean? That whenever the input is changed, input value is changed, it is also reflected in the output, right? So we have the cost of asset given to us, which is 10 lakh here, and salvage value is given to us 50,000. For life of asset, we have created a drop down using data validation. You can see for life of asset, we generally range the values from 1 to 20. For months in first year, again, we have created a drop down using data validation, and obviously months would be 1 to 12. Like I told you before, the uh, data validation can be done through either sourcing the list, like I have sourced the list from here for life of asset, or just typing in. So for months and first year, I typed in. For life of asset, I have sourced the list from here. It is simple. You go to the data validation, and under allow, you will choose list option. Like for months in first year, I've typed this in. You can see, and for life of asset also, I'll just quickly show you. This list has been sourced from here, right? So that's what the question is. Please note that this schedule does not say anything about generalizing the depreciation method. So depreciation is calculated separately on both SLN and DB basis, right? So the question is here in front of us, that cost of asset is 10 lakhs, then life of asset, obviously we can choose from the drop down. Salvage is 50,000, and months in first year, again we can choose from the drop down. So the idea here is now that we should input such formulas, such functions, that if the years change, for example, I'll just quickly show you how the generalized sheet should actually work like. So let's say I change the life of asset from 8 to 13. You know, n is 13. The period should be till 13 plus 1, 14. So see, the schedule also got changed. Let's say I also change the months in first year. You would notice that the depreciation calculated would also change. So let's say I make it 11. You see, depreciations have also changed. Let's say I want it to be calculated for 20 years. So it should reflect me schedule till 21st year. So it's doing that. So for making these generalized sheets, we are going to tell you how we do that. All right. So I'm going to go back to 8 years and I choose 10 months here. Now, before we start preparing the depreciation schedule, you should know one thing for sure, that we are going to be inputting formulas for just two periods, period 1 and 2. All right, because this is going to be a generalized schedule. So for period 1, the formulas would be same as we have discussed in the previous question. You can see it in this reference box that I've created for you. So for period 1, the formulas that are going for calculating depreciation through SLN or DB, they are just the same that we discussed in the questions that we've already discussed. For period 2, we are going to introduce new formulas that will obviously lead to generalization of the whole sheet. These formulas that will go into period 2 will then assure that we get the output schedule as the inputs are changed, right? So let's go on discussing that. Let's come to period 1 first. Here we just enter the period as 1. This is hard coded number, right? And then depreciation for SLN. You know, since SLN does not take number of months in first year as an argument, here the depreciation is given by multiplying the SLN by months in first year by 12 to compute basically proportionate amount that is charged in year 1. This we've already discussed, and this is how we calculate depreciation here in SLN. So you can have a look at the formula as well. Is equal to SLN function into months in first year, which is here, by 12. If you look at the arguments within the SLN syntax, they are cost has been taken from here, salvage again taken from here, and life is the total number of years for which the asset is to be depreciated, right? So following this guideline, we for period 1 we input this formula for depreciation under SLN in period 1, remember. Then we go on to the DB. Obviously for DB it's a simple plain DB function. So for period 1, DB function is going to be like this. You say is equal to DB parenthesis and all the arguments that are asked for. Cost is there in the question, salvage is given to us in the question, again life is there, which is n. Period is the particular period for which we are calculating depreciation, and then the month is the months in first year. So this comes from here, and that's all. So for period 1, we are going to be following the same guideline as we did in the previous question, this question, right? So this is how we did for the first one. Now, since we've gone back the previous question, you would see that for period 2 to n, we were calculating SLN one way, and then we were going to n plus 1 period, and then again putting a different formula in place. So to get rid of, putting formulas again and again, what we are going to do now is that we are going to put such formula which can be copied across even to n plus 1, and we need not type another formula for n plus 1, right? So from period 2 onwards we will put these formulas. Right now, you know that this Excel sheet is generalized for all inputs. If life of asset changes, all calculations in schedule should also change automatically, and there should not be any extra calculations on the sheet. So from second year onwards, we have to first of all see whether further calculations are required or not. So what do? We come to the period cell like we've come here, right? And what command do I want to give to Excel? I want to tell it that if the previous period, if this period is less than the useful life of asset plus 1, if it's less than n plus 1, then obviously I need a number here, then the period number should be displayed, else the cell should remain blank, like it, because I've already placed the formulas here, so it is not giving me any period here, because I've already given it the command that if the previous period, if this period is less than useful life of asset plus 1, if it's less than n plus 1, only then is it supposed to display a number, display a period here, else it'll leave it blank. So here, when it came to 9, it must have understood that now the value has become equal to n plus 1. So instead, it gave me a blank here. It did not give me any number here, right? So how do we ensure that what formula we type in, we will write this one. So please focus for period 2. What we're going to write, it's going to be an if statement, and we write if parenthesis previous period is less than n plus 1. Previous period is this, right? So if previous period is less than n plus 1, n you know is your life of asset, then what we need previous period plus 1 here, then I need it to reflect this value 2 here. So previous period 1 plus 1, 2. Else it should leave the cell blank. It should return blank value. For blank, we denote it by these two double inverted commas, right? So this is the if statement that we write here, and obviously we make use of the cell referencing. So let's see what we did and how we did. We said if the previous period is this, is less than n plus 1. N is life of asset. We do absolute referencing to the cell, because I don't want, when the formula gets copied, I don't want this value to change. N is going to be this only. So if previous period is less than n plus 1, I believe you already know how to go about the if function. If for if function, you first put in your logical test, then you put the value that you want if the statement is true, and then you put the value you want if the statement is not true. So the true value that we put is that if the period is less than n plus 1, then we need it to return the previous period plus 1 value. So B13, the previous period plus 1. Else it should return what? It should return blank cell. So for blank, I just told you double inverted commas. This is if the statement is true, and this is the statement, right? So we just do that, and it has returned to me this value 2 here. In period 2, for both depreciations, be it be SLN or DB, we write nested if statements. You know what is a nested if? So there's an if statement, and within that statement there's an if statement, right? So for both depreciations, be it be SLN or DB, we are going to write nested if statements. And why is that? Because first we would want to check whether further calculations are to be made or not. Because let's say we don't have any period here, so do we want any depreciations to be calculated in these cells? Obviously no, because this cell has been left blank. We don't want any depreciations to be calculated here. So that's why for both depreciations, we are going to first check if the calculations are to be made. And how do we check? By ensuring if there is any number here. If there is any number here in the period cell, then yes, depreciations have to be calculated. And if the period cell is blank, then we don't need to calculate any depreciations. So nested if goes in both the depreciations. Now, if we talk about period 2 depreciation for SLN, so far you know that depreciation for all years 2 to n. I will just go back to the previous question. For depreciation for 2 to n years in under SLN is simple plain SLN. But if asset had been purchased somewhere mid-year, right, and is not purchased in the beginning of the year, then when you go to the n plus 1, depreciation has to be charged proportionately for the remaining 12 minus months in first year. So this is what we did in the second question. So gathering that information and trying to bring this piece of information in one statement, we use an if statement in SLN to check whether the calculation is being made for the year n plus 1 or 2 to n, and accordingly we use the if statement. What is that if statement for SLN? Let's see. That if statement is, if you look from here, so we say that if period is n plus 1, then the SLN has to be charged proportionately. So if period is equal to n plus 1, then the SLN is charged proportionately. How? 12 minus months in first year by 12. Else, simple SLN is calculated. Else meaning for periods 2 to n, simple SLN is calculated, right? And to this statement, we add another if statement to check whether whether the calculations are to be made or not. And how do we do that? We have this if statement that is added to this if statement to make it a nested if. So we say that if period is blank, if this period is blank, if there's nothing here, then return blank value, else give me this whole statement, right? So let's see how we do that. So we say, you first write down if period is equal to n plus 1, then then how do you calculate SLN? Your SLN into 12 minus months in first year by 12, right? So I'm talking about this statement as of now, this if statement. First I will cover this if statement. This is for the SLN, calculating depreciation under SLN, and this if statement is for stopping the calculations, if we need the value to be calculated or not. So you will write this statement first. What does it say? That if period is n plus 1, then return the value SLN into 12 minus months in first year by 12, else return simple SLN. And to this if statement, you add another statement to check whether calculations are to be made or not. So for stopping the calculations if not required, you say that if this period is blank, if it's empty, then return blank, else give me this value, right? So this is how your statement goes. Please be very particular about closing these brackets, about the parentheses. Whatever number of parentheses you have opened, you must ensure that they are closed at the end also, right? So this is the statement, and that's how you get your SLN value. And now I need not go to the bottom and again write a statement. I can just copy paste it across and I'll get the values, right? So that is depreciation under SLN. Under DB, to compute depreciation for second year onwards, again we first check if the depreciation has to be calculated or not. Because if the period here is blank, then again we don't need the depreciation, like we did in the case of SLN. We just saw that the SLN nested if statement was that if period is blank, that is if this period is blank, then the value it should return, if the statement is true, is blank, else the SLN statement. So the same idea we are going to follow when we write the formula for DB from period 2 onwards, that if period is blank, then return blank value, else the DB statement. Obviously the DB statement is not exactly the same as SLN statement. There's a bit of difference and we'll just discuss that. But I'm saying the basic idea of both remains the same, that we first check if depreciation is to be computed or not. And for that we have this nested if, where we say if period is blank, give me blank, else return the SLN statement. If period is blank, return blank, else the DB statement. So let's see what we do in period 2 under DB method. Now DB method, we would be calculating depreciation if the period is less than or equal to life of asset. If this period is less than or equal to n, or when the months in first year would be less than 12. So in either of these two situations, some depreciation under DB would be calculated, else it would be 0. Right? So we write that statement. What is that DB statement? It's an if or statement. We say if or months in first year is less than 12, then calculate DB. If or period is less than or equal to n, then we calculate DB. And if both these conditions are not being satisfied, then return the value 0. Right? So this is the DB statement. And how does it go? It goes with this if statement in front of it and makes it a nested if, that if period is blank, return blank, else the DB statement. The DB statement being that if the period is less than or equal to life of asset or months in first year are less than 12, then DB is calculated, else 0. You can see from here how we have made use of the formula. So first have a look at the DB statement. This is a DB statement, the one I've just highlighted. It's an if or statement, and we say that if months in first year is less than 12, because you would remember that when we go to n plus 1, DB would be calculated if months in first year is less than 12, and if it's not, then depreciation would be 0. That's why we have this thing here, that if or months in first year is less than 12, and or the period is less than or equal to n, because again until n we are going to be calculating DB. That's why these two under if or. So if either of these conditions get satisfied, then the DB has to be calculated, else 0. Right? And then to this we add this statement, if statement here, this one, which says that if the period is blank, then return the value blank. So if that is not the case, if the period is not blank, then go for this thing, right? So the logical test becomes, if the period is blank, then return value blank, else the value, if false, will become the DB statement, right? So that is how we do calculate depreciation under DB from period 2 onwards. And once you copy it again, I would give you the right results. So now the sheet has become generalized for these two inputs, life of asset and months in first year. I can keep on changing the years, and the output sheet would give me the right results. So if n here is 16, you know that the schedule should stretch to n plus 1. Say it got stretched to 17 and it did not go any further, because we had put in place the if statements to ensure that the calculations get stopped if they are not required, right? And this was the question where we had drop downs for life of asset and months in first year. These were the two inputs that we could change. But in the next question, you will see that we are going to make a generalized sheet where even depreciation method can be changed. So for example, in this question, we had two separate columns for calculating depreciation according to SLN and DB. But in the next question, we are going to have just one column of depreciation, and there, depending on whether the SLN method is chosen above or the DB method, we are going to make a depreciation schedule. So let's go to the next question. Right, so this is the next question. Here you can see cost of asset is given and salvage is given. Rest, these three things, life of asset has a drop down, right? You know, drop downs, you can place them through data validation, and this is the source of that list for life of asset. Months in first year again is a drop down, 1 to 12, you can see here. This is the source list, again from data validation only, and depreciation method. So this is the new thing that is being introduced in the last question of depreciation, that we will make a Excel sheet which is generalized for all the input method, all the inputs, even the depreciation method. So here you see a drop down where you can select the method of depreciation. This I have typed in by going to data validation, allow, list, and I typed it in, right? So uh, this is the question. Now we are required to make a plant and machinery account which is generalized for all inputs including the methods of depreciation. I've told you this before also, that whenever you're required to make a fixed asset account, plant and machinery account, you will make these columns: period, opening balance, depreciation, and closing balance, right? So opening balance and closing balance also have to come into picture, which they were not there in the previous question. So going to our fourth question, let's have a look at the reference box that I've created for you here. You would notice that the first period is just the same as before. We hardcode the number period. So we hardcode this number for period 1. This 1 is hardcoded. Opening balance is the cost of the asset, right? So we will do a cell reference for opening balance. And then the closing balance is opening balance minus depreciation. If you look at the depreciation part, it will obviously depend on whether the method of depreciation is DB or SLN. So we say that if method is DB, then we need a DB statement, which is simple DB actually for the first period. Else SLN has to be calculated, and you know that SLN for first period is calculated this way: SLN into months in first year by 12, right? Then from period 2 onwards, for period 2, we put in these statements. I will explain to you these. You must have already got the idea because we just did them in the previous question. Anyways, so going on to the period, you know that this one is hard coded. Opening balance, like I told you before, this is the cell reference for from here. This is the cost of asset. Yeah, this is the cost of asset, right? About the amount of depreciation, it will depend on whether DB method is chosen or SLN is chosen. So we write a statement like this, that if the method chosen is DB, so the cell reference is this. If this is equal to DB, and please remember that because this is not numeric, these are non-numeric values, so we put them in double inverted commas here. We say if the method is DB, then simple DB is to be calculated, this one. Else SLN for first period will be calculated, and you already know how SLN for first period is calculated, because SLN does not take number of months in first year as an argument, and if the asset is purchased mid-year, proportionate amount of depreciation is to be calculated, and that's why we do SLN into months in first year by 12. So that is depreciation formula for first period. Then closing balance is simple. That's opening minus depreciation. You know that this Excel sheet is generalized for all inputs, and this is basically how we are going to be inputting the if statements for period 2. So if you look at this particular one, the statement that we put in the period column it is just same as the one that we saw in the previous question, right? You can see it is the same as that. Why is that? Because we would not know what life of asset is chosen here, and if life of asset is changed, all the calculations should also change automatically. And also we have to ensure that there are no extra calculations on the sheet. The sheet should be clean. It should be till where it is supposed to be, right? So from second period onwards, we have to see if calculations are required or not. And for second period, if previous year, this one, like I've already explained to you, but again, so for second period, we'll see that if previous year is equal to useful life of asset plus 1, then further calculations have to be stopped, else the period number should appear for the current year. So this is the statement that we write, that if previous period is less than n plus 1, then return the value previous period plus 1, else return blank. So this is what we wrote in here. You can see that if previous period is less than n plus 1, then return previous period plus 1, else return blank. Okay, then in this opening balance, what is the structure? Now here we are going to say that we want calculations to be made here only if there is some value here. If this is blank, then this should also remain blank, right? So we're going to say that if period is blank, if this period is blank, then return blank, else return me the previous closing balance, because you know that previous closing becomes the new opening. So that is what we are going to say, that if period is blank, this cell here does not have any value, then we don't need any value here also. This can also, sorry, this can also remain blank. Else give me previous closing balance. So let's see what we did. We just did that if your period is blank, then give me blank, else the previous closing. If you look at the closing balance, we'll come to depreciation, but before that, let's quickly see closing balance because it's based on the same pattern. The pattern being that if period here is blank, then give me blank, else give me what is required. And what is required? Opening minus depreciation. So if period is blank, give me blank, else give me opening balance minus depreciation. So that is what we wrote in this if statement. You can see that if the period is blank, return blank value, else return opening balance minus depreciation. As simple as that. For computing depreciation second year onwards, we are going to be following this structure here. This is how our nested if statement is going to be structured. So first we put a statement for stopping the calculations. This we did in the previous question also. Then we write the statement for choice of method, if DB is to be chosen or SLN is to be chosen. Then we write the DB statement and then the SLN statement. And that is how these four come together to form our main nested if statement that goes in here. So these are the particular statements. So for stop calculation, we have to from second year onwards, we have to first check whether depreciation has to be calculated or not. Because after n plus 1 years, we have to stop the calculations. So this is how we begin our nested if. The first if is this, that if period is blank, then give me blank. Else what? Else go on to the next in line, which is choosing between the method. So for choice of method, we write that if method is DB, then DB argument is given, which is this, and else if method chosen is SLN, then the SLN argument is given, which is this, right? So first is you calculate, you check whether the calculations are required or not. Then you check for method of depreciation. Now you know that if method of depreciation is DB, then when either months in first year are less than 12 or the year for which depreciation is computed is less than or equal to life of asset, then DB will be calculated, else the value would be 0. And if method is SLN, then we check whether year for which depreciation is computed is equal to n plus 1, because if that's the case, then we calculate depreciation for balance method, for balance months, which is 12 minus months in first year by 12. Otherwise, full year depreciation is computed for all years which are 2 to n, right? So these are the four statements. They have to be clubbed together to form one nested if statement. Let's see how you actually calculate. So you write your if statement, if statements, and you can start with your SLN if statement first. I'm highlighting it here. So the if statement, the first if statement that you can write is for SLN argument, which is that if period is equal to n plus 1, then we need SLN into 12 minus months in first year by 12, else the simple SNL. Then to this you can add your DB argument or the DB statement, which is this if or statement that you see here. So here, what do we say? That if or months in first year is less than 12 or period is less than or equal to n, then return us the DB depreciation, else 0. To this you add your choice of method if, which is this if the choice of method, this cell is DB, right? And then to this you write your you add your stop calculations part, which is if the period is blank, then blank, right? So this forms a complete nested if. These four components come together to form a complete nested if statement that goes in your depreciation in this question. I hope this was helpful.